Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions. Gil, welcome to the Shoe Room on tour.
Thanks for having me.
We're kind of in your part of the world rather than mine, so we're at Birdie Salmon's offices in Bristol. Can you tell everyone watching and listening who you are and what you do?
I'm Gil Martin. I am the Director of Estates and Natural Capital at Belmont.
Awesome. Career contents page time. Can you take us back to where you grew up, where you're from, how you charted a course to leading Belmont right now?
I'll do my best. So I grew up in a town on a street. My dad was a plumber, and so I didn't track a conventional course or pathway to leading a kind of rural business or a natural capital business. But I always had a yearning, burning kind of desire to engage with nature, to connect with nature.
Can you remember an early experience of that being real time in nature or a connection?
So I can remember the catalyst. The catalyst was my granddad. So my granddad worked for the Forestry Commission, lived in tied accommodations in the woods. He spent half his time with a chainsaw in his hand and the other half his time blowing tree stumps out the ground with gelignite, which is as a young boy, I
Isn't getting cooler than that,
perhaps the coolest thing in the world. And so I used to cycle over to their place and I used to kind of slake my thirst for nature connection by going out and walking through Hawley Woods. It was trying to find birds' nests, trying to identify animal tracks and things. And so I've always been seeking it in a kind of guerrilla nature connection kind of pattern, climbing over fences. I lived in suburbia, so I actually climbed over fences into an airport and rooted around there, long grass and things. And the combination of the thrill of that nature connection and not being allowed to do it was intoxicating. And so I've always been on a pathway to working in nature in some form or another. Never really worked in any other sphere. I've either been managing estates, managing farms, exploring conventional conservation and maybe even pure ecology, exploring food production, extensive food production. I really enjoy the connecting landscape of food and people and experience. And I really like money. So I like exploring the commercial opportunities of diversification. And whether that's been with the National Trust or with private estates or farms, I've been exploring each one of those subjects along the way. And Belmont is where all of those threads combine. And so that somehow fated, I'm sure it was, I've ended up at Belmont where we do all of those things in one place.
Awesome. So tell us about arriving there for the first time and how long you've been there and how the roles evolved over your time.
So I've been there nearly 6 years, which feels like a really long time, in a good way. And I must have been profoundly uncompelling because my interview lasted, I think, nearly 5 hours. So I came along, I was being interviewed for a role which was, I think, called Farm and Woodland Manager, which was the practical operational management of the farms and the woodlands. I probably didn't need to explain that. And I came along and walked around with the owners who were fascinating and engaging and asked me lots and lots of questions. And I was, and usually am, pretty brave with my answers. So I began to explain that, I can manage the farms and the woodlands, but I think there's something bigger here. I think there's something else we can explore. And the answers I was getting back from the owners so often contained some really fascinating, really heartfelt values of nature connection, of food production and provenance and stewardship of that asset. And so through the course of that marathon interview, it became apparent that there was a bigger, more holistic picture we could attend to. We could really understand the value of the landscape. And so I bravely said, your job's pretty good. And I could do that almost in my sleep, but is there a bigger job that we could do together? And I went away thinking, I've blown that one then, haven't I? And somehow it worked. And so they invited me back. And Belmont is the place where momentum lives. So having spent a few years working for the National Trust, full of people who I really respected the values, slightly frustrated with the pace at which any one individual could work within that organisation, or maybe even the pace that organisation, given its scale, was able to operate at. I've had lots of respect for the National Trust, but I was yearning impact and traction and momentum. And Belmont is the place where if you say something good today, you're doing it tomorrow. And so it really, really suits me. I think it probably terrifies some people, but it really suits my mentality.
Nice. When you were playing those sort of questions back to the owners, did they know the things you were sharing with them? Had they realised that was their vision, or had you had to tease that out?
No, that's such a good question. So obviously the arrogant version of me wants to, and maybe even for this whole time up until a minute ago, believed that I was somehow steering them on a pathway to something new. But I think probably the reality is they're maybe teeing me up to unpack a way of working that they already somehow knew that they wanted to explore, and I just happened to find some fertile ground. I think they were probably steering me towards those answers. But certainly the combination of their values and their appetite for impact and their resource and the knowledge and the approach that I brought has turned out to be a pretty powerful combination.
Having had the pleasure of coming to visit you and hearing you tell that story, I think it's probably both. I think by the sounds of it, they had elements of that, but you provided a way of bringing those themes together into something that could be delivered as a vision.
Yeah, and maybe they've got that vision. They've definitely got that vision. They've run businesses before. They are dynamic, forward-thinking, ambitious, creative people. And whilst the owners have got all of the strings to their bow that I just mentioned, they maybe didn't have those core technical abilities or experiences that I brought with me.
Yeah, nice. So if you had to explain Belmont to someone who knew nothing about the place, how would you encapsulate what it is?
Yeah, that's a good question. We work really hard to figure out a one-liner.
Simple's hard, right?
Simple's so hard. It wasn't so hard that we failed. The challenge is that we do so many things. So we are a business made of so many parts. We've got this broad, wide, eclectic ambition.
And as soon as you nail it simply, everyone tries to add bits on anyway.
Yeah.
So it grows and morphs and changes and...
Yeah, and you're supposed to nail it simply, right? But then I also just want you to stay with me for a couple of seconds and let me tell you the other bits that back up that simple kind of soundbite. Because although the soundbite sounds cool and is required for marketing purposes, there is just a bit more I want to tell you. Just stick with me for a sec, and I'll give you some colour for that picture. Anyway, so I'll have a go. So Belmont is a regenerative organisation that seeks to have impact in the fields of nature, climate, and community.
Perfect.
So give us a second. We do that. That manifests itself in a range of different projects, whether they're ecosystem restoration, climate resilience, or community regeneration. We engage in projects that are built out of our passions, built out of our values, and as a secondary element, we seek to finance those through natural capital products. Very much in that order. The natural capital opportunity doesn't come first. The natural capital opportunity is an accidental outcome of the things that we're passionate about, but we will bloody well harness them in order to make what we do sustainable and scalable.
Lovely. Absolutely. So in terms of the farming side of things, you've gone from closer to a conventional approach to embracing principles of rewilding. Talk us through the realities of making that a thing.
Well, the first reality is that we do both. So food production really matters. Of course, food security matters. I like food. I have dinner almost every day. It really matters. And then the second part of that is that what you choose to do where is based on all of the variables of that site, of the ecological context or the geographical context or the societal context. So it's like painting a picture. We know the picture is going to be of nature restoration and climate mitigation and community regeneration, but what colours we use depends very much on what we've got in front of us. So some sites lend themselves to regenerative farming. Sometimes sites really lend themselves to some ambitious, open-ended, process-focused nature recovery. And we do both. We do all things. And so the second or third part of that story is that I want to untangle the binary way that we look at nature and food, because it's a waste of all of our time and energy to squabble over food or nature. What we need to do is to understand that it's both everywhere all the time. Food production is just nature. So food is the ripening of a root node for a potato or the swelling of an ovary for an apple. It is just nature, and all of food production is dependent on healthy natural processes. So whether that's a sustainable, predictable, steady climate, or whether it's water availability, or whether it's, we talk about pollinators all the time, but it's true, we're losing our pollinators on our watch. They are disappearing. And 3/4 of our crops are dependent in some way on animal pollination. And sometime in our lifetime, we may well lose apples, pears, melons, nuts, chocolate. And so you've really got to take this seriously. It will have an impact on us. And so a healthy natural world is absolutely key to producing food. And you cannot have a conversation about whether it's one or the other. We can argue about yields and things, but the real argument is about food or no food. And so somehow the conversation over farming or rewilding, I think, needs to come closer together. We need both things in every scenario, nearly all the time.
Totally agree. When you're looking at one particular area of land across the estate, how do you make the decision about what the best use of one particular pocket or area is?
Which I realised was the actual question. I didn't answer it.
Well, you spoke beautifully though, so we need it.
Yeah, thanks. So
I can see how that interview went 5 hours.
Yeah, right. Uncompelling. That's what you can title.
I love the title, so I'm going to write a piece on that.
Yeah. I noticed you could make a little note. Yeah. Brilliant. I'm glad that the one thing I could do was inspire you as to how uncompelling I was.
Inspired me lots.
So what was the question? The question was...
How do you decide the deployment of each different piece of land?
So there's a process, and maybe it's not a hugely formal process, but you're trying to understand I am trying to understand what that piece of land naturally wants to be, rather than invest in fighting against it.
For people who don't spend time in the environment, that question sounds so alien. So if you say to people, what does land want to be or want to do? They're like, how can land want anything? But it does. To someone who spends time in nature and the environment and understands soil and ecology and topography and the weather around it, it tells you, right?
Yeah, and you can choose. You can either work with it and be successful, or you can work against it and pour time and money and resources,
chemicals and energy and everything.
Absolutely, and ultimately fail. Yeah. And you might succeed all the time. You're massively investing time, energy, chemicals, resource, effort, blood, sweat, tears.
We went to look at a site in the northwest, and we met this largely unpleasant gentleman, Josh Hayden, and he said, and he was growing maize on in a wetland, literally like on an intertidal area. He's like, best crop I've ever grown. It's amazing. It's been brilliant. Like, it's got better year on year. And I said, oh, what year is this? And he said, oh, it's year 3. Year 2 was down quite a bit on year 1, and it's struggling this year. And I was like, okay, yep, it's going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to do that. But he's going to keep fighting.
Yeah,
keep fighting.
And all you do is make yourself at the mercy of the variability of the inputs that you put in. So all you need is a spike in input prices because of some geopolitical crisis caused by someone acting badly on the global stage, and your business is not resilient. So find a vision which suits what that landscape wants to be. And then there are other constraints. There are plenty of constraints out there dressed as opportunities maybe. So I need to be careful not to be rude about designations because they have a place. Preserving and conserving things, really important. Otherwise, this mission of nature recovery that I'm very passionate about, which is to create natural processes, and you find when you take your foot off the neck of nature for a split second, that nature comes pouring back in, has to come pouring back in from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so those conservation pockets of conserved biodiversity, for want of a better word, matter. But the designations that exist as a result of some of those mindsets can be really quite problematic. So the reason on the Belmont Estate, which is our kind of regenerative farming model, the reason we went down a regenerative farming route is because that landscape is listed. So the buildings are grade 2 listed and the landscape is grade 2 star listed. The actual landscape itself listed under a parkland listing. And so if you've got a kind of ecologically ambitious approach where you want natural process, not objective focused, I want creeping scrub and all sorts of wonderful structural changes to that landscape, I would immediately butt up against that listing. And so there's an example of something I just have to work with at that point in time. So there, combined with the fact that it's also, there's some cultural heritage we need to be sensitive about. There's some, it's also part of the Tinsfield Park and Gardens listed landscape. So we've got to be sensitive about a number of things. That led us to a zero input regenerative mixed grazing farm, still driven by the same principles, still about nature friendly food production, but delivered in a slightly different way. Across the road, we've got a site unshackled, by listings and designations. And so we can be really much more ambitious, much more open-ended with that site.
I think people will be quite surprised about hearing you talk about the designation. I think lots of people won't recognise or won't be aware that designations can hold to land as they can property. And I am going to be quite critical of some designations, particularly around national parks. So it's a heck of a job of branding and marketing, because the vast majority of people think, oh, national parks, they're great for the environment. They're not. They're terrible. They're not performing and they never were meant to. They were meant to provide public access for people in cities to the environment outside. They weren't meant to promote ecological abundance or variety or anything. And we're kind of trying to hold them to that standard. So it's not fair. I think the chief exec jobs at national parks are like one of the hardest jobs in the country, because bring lots and lots of people here, but make sure nothing changes. They're diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, are you in favour of new national parks? No, I'm in favour of funding the national parks to improve the environment there. But their own designations make it really hard for them even to do anything that might improve space for nature. So I think we've got to watch out for perverse incentivifications around designations, that they're actually trying to do positive things as opposed to just maintain something that is imperfect or broken.
Yeah, and look, the landscape within which we make decisions has fundamentally changed. We don't have time to strategize and take time and operate in a way of thinking which came 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We have to change how we think. Anymore. We absolutely don't. What we need to seek is impact and momentum, and we can evolve and iterate to perfect along the way. And so there was a time when to conserve and preserve was the right mantra. We invented conventional conservation, for want of a better word, at the turn of the century with the RSPB and the Natural Trust. Wonderful organisation.
Yep, totally.
But there is an absolute desperate need now, not for conservation and preservation, but for restoration and recreation.
I say the same thing about sustainability, right? We had our shot at sustainability in the early 80s and we blew straight past it.
Yeah.
So we need to be regenerative now. Yeah. I spent my life crossing out the word sustainable and putting regenerative, because sustainable means keeping the bad.
Yeah.
Gone, done. Yeah. Need regenerative there. What does natural capital mean, Gil?
So in a literal sense, I'll skim over the literal meaning, but it is only the resources, the stocks of a landscape and of an environment, and the value that they possess. And it's not a way of thinking that I think as a society we've been really used to accounting for that value, and that has two impacts. So if you don't account for the value of a landscape and the component parts of that landscape, be that the nature, the minerals, the outputs, then you consume them without care or need or plan for how they're going to be restored or replenished. And so this true cost accounting of where anything comes from is a critical area of work for us as a society. If we don't really understand the true cost of the resource that we've consumed and how it's going to be replenished over what time, then we will do as we've done for the last several hundred years, which is consume beyond our means and boundaries. The other thing that accounting for natural capital allows you to do is it allows you to build a market. And if you can build a market where natural capital has a value, then you can incentivize and galvanize projects and approaches and systems that build natural capital, that restore and regenerate landscapes, that ultimately would not have been restored or regenerated without the lubrication of commercial opportunity. So I don't really, deep down in my heart, believe in applying commercial value to the innate glory and beauty of nature, but I absolutely believe that it's what we need to do now, because we need impact, we need traction, we need momentum. And if you can't show a commercial opportunity, then half the people are unable to join you because they've got bills to pay, mortgages to pay. They're just unable to take part. And the other half are not willing to take part because they've got a commercial mindset. So if we're going to get traction and momentum, then that's understanding the commercial value of natural capital, nature recovery, climate action, I think is fundamentally a very, very exciting opportunity.
Have you read Pricing the Priceless by Paula DePerno?
Yes, because you recommended it last time we chatted. Yep.
Love that book. My answer is the absence of a price on carbon is the cause of climate change. The absence of a genuine penalty on the water companies putting sewage in our rivers is why they're full of sewage. We've tried not having a market mechanism. The best analogy in that book is a significant oil spill that kills a load of wildlife is a positive for GDP. because you're spending money on the cleanup operations and the disposal. It looks good on the balance sheet. How fucked up is a system when that appears like a financial positive?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just broken.
And look, similarly, the ramifications of what I'm saying is that you understand the true cost accounting of your food. Food goes up.
Yeah.
And that
food is too cheap.
Well, that would be seen for a lot of people as a massive failure, when actually is exactly where society has got to get to, is to understand the true impacts and the true value and the true cost of the things that we put in our body. Not only because if we get it right, the things we put in our body will deliver benefits for nature and benefits for us, for our bodies and for our children's bodies, but because we can't continue to take at the rate that we're continuing to take. We've got this false system that we're operating within. So that's a really difficult message to get across.
Like when credit cards first appeared, everyone thought they could spend on them willingly without any consequence. And we're treating the environment like that. We can just take and run up a debt and not ever hope to repay it.
Yeah, and the truth is we won't repay it. Our children will probably repay it. And so it's time to take responsibility.
Agreed wholeheartedly. Sat against the sort of slight moral discomfort of doing this, how are you looking to monetize the natural capital that your projects are producing?
So first thing to double reiterate is we do everything we do out of values. So we produce B&G on one of our sites, except...
Can you explain to people what B&G is?
Yeah, B&G is something called biodiversity net gain, and it's a piece of new planning legislation mandated in February this year, which seeks to pivot development that requires planning permission, whether it's your extension, hypothetical extension, Rich, or 10,000 houses, to make from nature negative, potentially, to nature positive. And it, I think, is stands almost alone in a sort of slight void of meaningful, impactful policy as a real statement of intent at policy level. I really like B&G. I'm not saying it's without problems, issues, teething problems, unforeseen consequences. All of those things are true. Our project has been accidentally throwing off B&G units for nearly 4 years now, so we're well ahead of the game. And yet it is still a challenging field to operate within. There's still gaps in guidance, and there's still a load of stuff that only is able to be learned during the rollout phase at the early conceptual phase.
Section 106 agreements, long-term commitments, and legal documents. I wrote a piece recently that I don't think we've released it yet, but it compares the development of the nature-based economy to how tech and the internet developed, because they think there's people that are experts in emerging technologies and how things change, and there's a cycle. There's academic concepts and papers, early adopters, some failures, mass adoption, some failures, widespread adoption. And if you apply what we're doing now, it's the equivalent of, so there was an internet boom and .coms were really great, but you couldn't pay for anything online. You couldn't watch videos. You didn't know how the infrastructure of everything that needed to work. And I think we're in that time for the natural capital economy. All those little functions that make it work, insurance, accounting, principles, they're now being developed. And when you look at it in that timeline, we're in the equivalent of being in the early 90s for the internet. We're on dial-up, we're using AOL, MySpace hasn't arrived yet, no one's got a smartphone. We're so early in the development of this, those functional bits, the change protocols that allow you to pay for things like they're being developed for natural capital right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so often that is the sphere of private business.
Yeah.
So you've got early adopters, you've got pioneers, they'll go and we like to think we're in that group, and we'll forge new pathways and demonstrate pathways that people can follow, and equally as important, demonstrate pathways that you probably ought not to follow because they were challenging and didn't work.
I love that about you. You're always, in the same guise as we are, you're always happy to share those learnings.
Yeah.
And I think if we go back to 5 years ago, I don't think that was true with the environment sector. People weren't prepared to share stuff. I hadn't realized that until a recent podcast recording. I think it's been the influx of people from the financial world who are willing to share their financial learning with us and with the environment sector because they're desperate to take our knowledge of the environmental world. I think that's been a change because people were so protectionist in the environmental space 5 years ago.
Really? So I think it's because we seek money to secure and scale what we do, not for the sake of money. So really, the reason that you get out of bed in the morning and apply yourself, and all of us get out of bed in the morning and apply ourselves, is because we want to have impact that is born out of the values that we possess and feel passionately about. And so if by sharing an insight you can double your impact, you can help someone else have impact, that's your ultimate personal goal fulfilled.
It totally is. That wasn't what people used to be like in the environment sector. When I was at the Environment Agency, if someone had a new idea, God, don't tell them no, they might take it, they might do it. And you certainly weren't allowed to share your failures or challenges or anything like that.
Even though we recognise there's teething problems, there's rollout issues, I think the most powerful thing about BNG is that it's been launched as a piece of legislation in spite of that, knowing that, because its intent is that it can evolve and change, the metric can be updated year on year, it can iterate to perfect. It's a really powerful demonstration of action now and perfection as you go, which is absolutely a mantra that we all need to start to live by. So I think it's, I'm really pleased with BNG. Not only is it a good opportunity for a land manager to fold it into their kind of portfolio of opportunities, it's brilliant to pivot development from nature negative into nature positive, but it's also just a great demonstration of a different way of thinking about attending to the crises that we face.
Nice. What about the carbon side of things? Is that something you've explored as well?
Yeah, it is. So we've explored those more conventional existing natural capital opportunities like the voluntary carbon market and BNG, and they always, it's so repetitive, they come out accidentally of our nature restoration.
That's a feature, not a bug, right? That gives it absolute integrity and clarity of purpose.
Yeah.
We have not bought a single site with the principal aim of creating natural capital. So
no.
I remember being asked, how have you made this the most efficient possible? Nope. That's not what we're trying to do.
100%.
Maximize impact, environmental and social impact, and natural capital, and a profit comes as a result of that, not the purpose.
So I talk about, I'm not really interested in originating natural capital products. I'm interested in originating impact. And the natural capital will come out of it. And what's really difficult to do as you go through that process is to make sure that the commercial opportunity tail doesn't wag the dog. Carbon, ultimately carbon for us comes out of primarily all the usual places like peatland restoration. Peatland restoration is just wetland creation or wetland restoration. And we're passionate about that. We do that in a number of different places and a number of different spheres and a number of different ways. And so right up my street, and all of the cascading benefits of a functioning, healthy wetland system, which is about water quality, it's about the mitigation of flood water, the reduction of sedimentation, it's about air quality, water quality, and also, incidentally, it happens to prevent the release of carbon from 10,000 years worth of stored carbon. And so we do quantify that and we do sell that. But we make sure that it comes out of a values-driven process.
So if you had a neighbouring farmer reach out and say, really interested in what you're doing around natural capital, how should I look to integrate that in my land? What advice would you give them?
So I tried to, so I've got some neighbouring farmers, and I sat down with each of them one at a time and a cup of tea and a hobnob. And I said, here's what we're going to do. Might be a bit more messy than you're used to. It's a rewilding project. And so there's going to be the joy of thistles, brambles, docks, ragwort, that sort of thing. So number one, I want to just speak to you about that, to let you know what's coming down the line. But let me tell you all of the many benefits. And then let me finish by explaining there's an opportunity for us to work together here. It didn't go very far, that conversation. So to my gratitude, the farmers who I'm still friends with now said, yeah, love it, I get it, I love the natural world, I look forward to seeing how that pans out, really good luck to you. I don't yet want to join you because I've been doing it this way for X number of years, maybe even generations, and I can predict it and quantify it, and you are, at this point, this was several years ago, unable to quantify the opportunity. And so that conversation stopped pretty abruptly. However, we are now having knocks on our door, which it would appear that you are now able. First of all, I've seen the ragworts, the docks, and the thistles. They're not that bad. In fact, it's lovely to see charms of goldfinches filling the sky. Do you know what? I think the thought of them was worse than the reality. They may actually be quite nice. And then the second thing is, and what is becoming apparent is that you do know how to monetize this, and there is a quantifiable output. And I've got a mortgage to pay, Gil. So if there is some sense of a reliable output, then maybe we could work together. And so those conversations are coming to us rather than me going to them now. And this is about recognizing an opportunity. It's about understanding that, so there are many layers to this opportunity, Mr. Fellow Farmer. Number one, it's a diversification opportunity. So another income stream, if you apply, let's take B&G, for example, to your range of activities, then it's another revenue stream that is not weather dependent, not input price dependent. And so it gives you a bit of resilience in your farm business. Number two, and probably more profoundly, if you look at nature and building it into your farm business, it will underpin it over time. You don't have to do this based on some fluffy set of ecological values because you believe in it. That would be nice. But actually, the real reason to have a nature-friendly farming business is because it will fundamentally make your business better. So your farming business is in truth built on the provision of local pollinators, or a healthy soil biome, or the availability of water for your crops to grow. Your current business is built on input prices and things that you're not fully in control of. The more that you can let nature absorb and replace those bought-in inputs, the better your farm business will be. And if you do it correctly, you can add value to your product at the other end. And the thing that you hand over to your kids, you can be proud of, and you can start to attend to the big crises of the day. And something like B&G helps you to pay for it. So the conversations will be bloody easy when we get there. Just need a little bit of demonstration, because my experience is that promising is not as compelling as demonstrating.
Nice, lovely phrase. Ours is about, we talk about action, not announcements. The thing about the sort of wider natural capital economy is everyone's announcing something at the moment. And then you go, oh, brilliant, can we talk about, oh, right, you're not actually doing anything. You're just announcing the concept of doing, which is great. We need more people doing more exciting things, and momentum's as important for an entire sector as it is on an individual estate. But those people that are actually delivering changes are the ones that can show us the way.
Yeah.
And you've done a ton of that. So what are you most proud of, the changes on the ground? You don't just have to pick one, you can have a couple.
We've talked about it a lot, but really proud of a re-wetting project we did just outside.
And you should be. It's stunning.
It's really cool, right? Yeah. And we did it in reasonably quick time. It took us from concept to delivery about a year. It's transformed a previously ditched, drained, kind of compromised, ecologically pretty barren landscape into something which is now burgeoning with life and potential for extra life. So,
I saw it before you'd done anything. You showed me around it and was like, this is, and painted the picture in our minds, and it's...
Yeah, it's really cool. And do you know what? I mostly like it because we delivered a load of action. We put our money where our mouth was, and we made something happen, and it's really cool. It's not the biggest project we've ever done, but it's just outside Bristol. And so it packs a serious punch in terms of demonstration, in terms of access, in terms of reach. We've been able to get hundreds, actually thousands of people through that site to see it, feel it, connect with it, buy into it, be affected by it. Whether that's one of the 4,000 children that have come through that site for a nature connection experience, which is completely for free, or whether it's one of our community of 200 wildlife volunteers, or whether it's one of our corporate partners that comes and takes part in it. Their team have the opportunity to touch it, to feel it, to engage with it, to feel proud of it. That all forms part of a kind of patchwork of experience, which hopefully will do the other part of what we're so passionate about, which is to inspire behavioural change. So I don't believe, wandering off your point for a second, I don't believe that you can change the world by doing it. It's not enough hours in a day, you haven't got enough resource, you haven't got enough at your disposal. I believe the way you change the world, and we do need to change it, is by inspiring mass uptake. And you inspire mass uptake by putting your money and your heart and your effort and your blood and your sweat and your tears where your mouth is, doing it, standing by it and being proud of it, and inviting people over. And if you can give them a beer whilst they're there, then all the more power to you.
Experiential is so important.
Yeah.
And that's the exact reason for having the podcast, for why we write as much as we can, because we want to share as many potential opportunities for inspiration for people as possible, that they grab one thread and run with it in their own way.
Yeah.
And that's why, so by the time this is released, we should be just around 150 million value on the portfolio. That is enough of a catalyst to make... So I spoke to a group of young people today about their careers in the future. That's enough of a catalyst of funding moving into the environment sector to go, oh, there might be a space for a startup to do X to support that company, or to do Y. Yeah. And I think if we can, there's little pops of ideas and inspiration, that's how we grow a nature-based economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'm really proud of is the storytelling piece of what we do.
Yeah.
It feels at times like an extra piece of work, when I think the reality is it's probably the piece of work. For all of human history, we have been guided by stories. Before there was ever the written word or any digital content, you were listening to people tell you stories. That's how you learned, that's how you imbibed cultural norms and ways of doing things. And we're exactly the same now. So the stories really, really matter. You can sell someone a unit, an authenticated, verified dash in a spreadsheet, but actually that's not what they engage with. What they really engage with is the story behind that unit. That's the bit that reaches them in their heart. That's the bit they're going to go home and tell their kids about. That's the bit that their customers, their clients, their employees are going to care about. So I'm really proud of the amount of time and effort and importance that we place on the story.
When you articulated that way, I realized even the people that are buying digital currencies and crypto coins and stuff, they're buying stories too, but the story they're buying is the countercultural democratization of finance. In the absence of that story, no one's buying crypto. So you're totally right. That's why we're so proud to have a head of storytelling and an amazing storytelling team all sat behind the cameras. Thank you very much. You all rock. But you're right. And as a sector, again, it's something the environment sector didn't do well. When I think back, the National Trust probably did it a little bit more than most. But up until Craig Bennett's time at the Wildlife Trust, they didn't talk or tell stories. They were like, keep your head down, don't let anything happen, because everyone was so critical of every slip or mistake. But now I think there's almost a bit more of a safety in numbers. There's an awareness of the environment so much more that there's demand for it. And people are more forgiving, I think, in the sector of people trying to do things and admitting we didn't know how to do this. We got this bit wrong. We're experimenting, we're learning, and that iterating towards perfect as you described.
Yeah. And it's always, it takes time out of your day to tell stories where you could be doing something else. And so it's not always easy to allocate the time.
Great investment, though,
but it's the investment. And so I'm really proud of that. I guess another thing that we're proud of is to have conscientiously pivoted some things and some people who were unaware of the benefit of that pivot. So we may talk about it later, but we run an estate in Scotland. We've had it for nearly a year now, and when I first came up, there were some long-lived, really knowledgeable, really almost generational gamekeepers on that estate, and the estate itself had been running a pheasant shoot, really quite a big driven pheasant shoot for a long time, and I arrived with some sense of trepidation and anxiety that we have got a new set of ideas, and I don't want to turn your world upside down, and yet I do a bit, because there are elements of it that we feel we really need to change. We bought it because we're ecologically ambitious, we're societally ambitious to build community and culture, and you think that maybe driven pheasant and sport is the reason that there's 6 jobs on this estate, whereas we think that the presence of that sport is the reason there's only 6 jobs on that estate. And so I'm a bit nervous, and that's just been the most wonderful experience. So we've got a gamekeeper there who has changed kind of direction, and he now, all those skills which made him a brilliant gamekeeper now make him brilliant at helping us restore that landscape, understand that landscape, the animal behaviors, patterns, locations, the things that they do, the things that they don't do. He is now pivoting his skill set to look forward rather than backwards, and I found that to be the most kind of satisfying, engaging, positive process.
How did you make him comfortable or be willing to embrace the future without being able to see it directly?
Well, I guess first of all, it won't be the first time that they've heard this message. So 10, 12, 15 years ago, when NET were first kind of pushing their rewilding mission, they're pushing it onto a public who hadn't really heard it before. They were hard yards. And so now I'm sitting down in front of people talking about rewilding, and they already have a background, an understanding of it, an understanding that it's coming. We're kind of early adopters, but we're not the first. And so they weren't as hard a yards as they could be. But ultimately, it's all about comms and storytelling. But ultimately, really sitting down, understanding which bits of that place and that role and that job that you've enjoyed, and then really understanding that being that gamekeeper for that person was a version of nature connection. I just need to find those pivot points, and I'll make it nature connection again, except that it'll be nature connection on steroids, because the nature, the abundance, the variety will be 10 times more than it's ever been before. And we will equip you for an industry which is emerging rather than an industry which feels like it's withering a bit.
So do you still practice moor burn up there?
Nope.
And what about predator control?
Predator control is really difficult. So I changed lots. I don't know when this will air, but from the point at which we're sitting here now, I'm about a year in, and I changed lots and lots. So no more driven pheasant, no more driven grouse, fundamental change. And one of the
Does that mean you still walked up shooting or not at all?
So there will be still some shooting. I'd like to talk about that in a minute because I'm quite passionate about that too.
Yeah.
So I'll come back to that. But I didn't change everything instantly. So there are things we should never change. We should never change the culture of shared experience, of having a dram and 11s on the hill, of the Tweed, of all of those things which have got embedded significance. They're really important. And although I thought I would change in X number of months, I'll stop all of the predator control because I fundamentally don't believe in it. Now that I'm trying hard to listen to those around me and to feel and absorb that place and the landscape and the traditions and the needs, I'm beginning to wonder about the validity of predator control, of scrapping predator control. So lots of interesting research from the RSPB about wader numbers in places where predators will either be controlled or not controlled. And I fundamentally believe that the more you remove pieces of the jigsaw, like for example through predator control, the more you have to remove other pieces of the jigsaw to account for the void that you've just created, and you're just chasing all the time. So the reason that a traditional keeper might spend their time shooting corvids is because they might have spent their time previously in years gone by removing the thing which predated on corvids. So if you had more goshawks, then you'd have something to moderate the level of corvids, and you're just creating this self-perpetuating thing. However, real focus on wader bird numbers at Aberada, and I've got this really prickly issue of what do we do about predator control. And so I'm still forming an opinion, but my current opinion is that we will continue with it and taper it to nothing when I've been able to put the other pieces of the jigsaw back into that landscape, and so it's much more able to be self-sustaining. I want to be a purist, but the reality is the time for being a purist is not now. 3-4 years ago, I would have been more of a purist than I am now. Now what I'm looking for is ways to cheat, corners to cut, ways to have impact as quick as possible, because there is, in my opinion, no time for the purest of purist approaches.
It's interesting. So we are in no predator control because I don't want to incentivize one aspect of nature versus all the others. So to me, a fox's life is as valuable to that ecosystem as a wader is.
And yet, I suspect you're engaging in managing of deer numbers.
Yep.
And so there is a real conflict.
Contradiction and compromise.
Contradiction, yeah.
Completely.
So if you're a fox and so if there's a landscape which has been made monostructural by the presence of perhaps overgrazing animals, whether that's a deer or sheep, then you've got this blank canvas of opportunity that stretches as far as the eye can see. You rock up and you're a fox, and it is your business to eat small birds, and you can have a huge impact across that landscape because there's nothing stopping you. You don't even have to look for them. They're there, laid out in front of you in a kind of readily available picnic blanket of opportunity. And so you can exert a disproportionate impact on that landscape because the landscape itself is broken. Whereas my current thinking, this may well evolve, is that once I've got some sense of landscape recovery, once I've got some structural diversity, some pockets, some nooks, some crannies, some scrub, some trees that will make that fox, as an example, that fox's job more difficult to just eat the whole picnic all at once, then I can have a much more naturalistic approach with predator numbers because it's a much more naturalistic environment that animal is operating within. So I personally feel you need a more complete picture before you can, I think I said earlier, take your foot off the neck of nature. That's my absolute desire. But there are ramifications and unforeseen consequences, and I just need to go slowly.
Yeah, do and don't. I'll be this side of the equation. I think at one of our estates in Invergeldy, we definitely have that variety of landscape. We don't so much at Blackwood and Hartscarth. But interestingly, we don't have the propensity of deer pressures there either, nowhere near the numbers. So it's really interesting. And I think the challenge culturally we experience we've had some good transitions with gamekeepers, we've had some less so. That one we found really challenging was the person's identity was so linked to, no, I burn the hill, no, I kill everything. Yeah. And despite us trying to offer alternatives and we worked for a year with this gentleman to try and he played to other skills that he had, which were plentiful. He's like, nope, I don't want to do that. My identity is I go burn this hillside at this time of the year. And ironically, we wanted him to focus more on the estate management side of it. He was an incredible machine operative who could lay the tracks and sort of fencing and everything like this. And so we helped him move on to his next chapter, and he's gone to do tracks and fencing, which we would have loved him to have done on the estate. Yeah. But the problem was he was too emotionally tied that his view of his role in that landscape was to maintain the status quo of the driven side of shooting. And what was really sad is when he was looking at the numbers of birds on the estate, it had been a cataclysmic decline year. And all the things that were done to maximise the environment for the bird numbers weren't working.
No.
They were all going the wrong way anyway.
They were all Nurophens to treat the headache rather than understanding what is causing the headache in the first place.
Yeah.
And so the cataclysmic decline of insects is the real reason, or one of the contributing reasons, the fact that we've had a huge decline in bird numbers. But at no point has anyone said, should we restore the insect numbers on the hill? But instead what they say is, no, we'll get more birds and we'll treat them for gape and we'll medicate them and we'll drug them up. And you're constantly taking Nurofen rather than ever wondering why you've got a headache in the first place.
Beautiful analogy. So talk to me about the importance of maintaining shooting.
So I eat meat, I eat food, and I really...
You said you have dinner almost every day.
Almost every day. And I want to connect people to where their food comes from. So the kind of romantic image of someone going out, checking a lobster pot, having a lobster or a mackerel on the beach and eating on the beach and connecting with that place in that moment and being healthy for it, I think is wonderful. What I want to create is a natural abundance that can sustain that. And so in balance, if you can create a healthy natural abundance, then for me, there is nothing more healthy than going out and catching or shooting your dinner, not for sport, but for connection purposes. And so gone are the days where you try and get a huge, great big bag beyond what you could eat for dinner. So I think it should be almost impossibly difficult because no one's driving them towards you because you have no idea where they're going to be or what they're going to be. But if you were to go out with some friends, shoot 1 or 2 birds, come back, pluck them, eat them, have some beautiful wine or beer with them, and it's been bloody difficult, you've missed more than you've shot, and you've had a dram on the hill, you've respected the place, the culture, and you've connected with your food, because an organisation like Belmont has restored that landscape so that there's an abundance that you won't affect, then I think that's really, really healthy.
That's, I think I could live with that. And embrace that approach. But it has to be an estate that can sustain that. And the ones that are broken can't.
No.
They're nowhere near there. They're shooting fish in a barrel, and it's not an appropriate approach. And we're not very good as a society of being patient and giving these things time to come back. We try and push our timelines we try and push the hunting season onto an environment that thinks in years and decades and centuries, not months.
Yeah, and look, for example, if you wanted to go stalking, which I'm sure you don't, you would go stalking, and the way you'd pay for it is by the stag or the hind that you shot, which is to presuppose you're going to get something. Whereas actually a complex functioning landscape where it's difficult for the fox to find his dinner makes it difficult for you to find your quarry, hypothetically here. And so I want you 9 times out of 10 to not find anything, to miss. I want that moment where you get something to be ecstatic, and then I want you to eat it and share it with your friends and not come back until next year. There is a healthy version out there. We've just got to find it and curate it.
So you naturally took us up to Scotland, which was really exciting. And I remember talking to you while you were up and down trying to make that deal come to fruition. So that was months in the works. Can you talk to us about the decision to buy that additional estate up there and the vision for what you hope to see happen?
Yeah. So I talked earlier about our watercress farm rewilding project, which is really powerful because it's just outside of Bristol. It's a massive platform from which to influence from. However, it is quite small in terms of ecosystem recovery, in terms of a critical mass for functioning communities and connectivity and some really big ecological principles. And so I want to take the same values that we apply down there, and I want to find opportunities to deliver them at a kind of landscape scale. And so that took us to Aberarder in Scotland, which was, again, Scotland's a peculiar place. So there are vast areas of this estate which are ecologically kind of derelict, and you could walk for a really long time and not really see or hear anything at all. And you think, blimey, this is a desert. Then you reach a little pocket of intactness, and it is a riot, the kind of which you haven't actually heard for decades in England. It has this weird juxtaposition of being almost completely knackered while still having little pockets where all the ingredients live, and it's completely inspiring.
What would you say to the people who see the knackered areas and think that's beautiful?
It is beautiful in one sense. Striking would perhaps be a better word. And I really do understand that landscape is striking, that landscape is different, and it's windswept and appears wild. But this is to ruin everyone's relaxed walk forevermore, where you are just enjoying this landscape which you had once taken to be wild, to completely ruin that for you forevermore. It's not wild at all. It's the product of generations of over-management. It is, if you peatland and peat forms at around, it takes about 1,000 years for 1 metre of peat to form. And you can walk through some of these peat gullies, and 2 or 3 metres down you can see trees. 1 metre down you can see the stumps of trees which have grown several hundred years ago or several thousand years ago. And yet, if you look above the top of the peat, you can't see a tree for 100 miles. That fossil within that peat strata is telling you that this landscape was more diverse than the landscape that you're seeing now. And so all landscapes in this country have been affected. They've been managed, they've been over-managed, and there are very few, if any, places where you can really see something which represents the wild, and Scotland is no different, going all the way back from clearances for provision of building materials or fuel, to sheep farming, to this reasonably modern passion for highland stalking. They've all exerted an impact on that landscape which delivers this kind of wild-ish, barren scene that we see today. Yeah. And once you realise that's not real, it spoils it a bit. So you see the opening credits of Countryfile, you see these fantastic U-shaped valleys in the Lake District, and then if you're actually there in that moment, if you imagine it and close your eyes, can you imagine any wildlife in that scene? And other than a crow or a herd with sheep, the answer is
it's the Yorkshire Dales for us that's the most jarring.
Yeah.
You just there and you're like, okay, there's a rock wall and a green field, and a rock wall and a green... Oh, there's a tree! There's one tree!
Yeah.
And until you point that out to people, they just see the beauty, and you're like, oh God, you see the absence.
Yeah, and you keep going down that road. So we're all in love with hedges. Hedges are just the most powerful conduits, linear connectors, and they are wonderful. Except that the only reason that they appear so wonderful is because the landscape within which they exist is completely barren and empty and vast and featureless. There is no such thing as a hedge. A hedge is just scrub. It's just scrub in a line. In fact, it's bloody weird. We should all find hedges a bit weird. Until you realise that what's so valuable about that hedge is the scrub, then you can't acknowledge the vast lack of scrub which exists across 70% of our farmed landscape in England. And so you go to Yorkshire and you see these open moors, and the walls are really important, but they're only important because everything else is so barren.
Completely agree. So back to Scotland.
Yes. Sorry, I forget what the question was.
No, it's beautiful. What's the vision there? What do you hope to project, and what are the changes that are going to come?
So again, I don't want to fight with that landscape. So I want to observe it and understand it and feel it for a while, so that I can truly answer that question, which is to fudge it in the first instance. But there are some things early on that you could just see need some attention. So what I really want to deliver is a landscape of complex, interacting, complementary, self-sustaining ecosystems. I'm really happy to crank the engine, to invest and to work and to intervene to get those natural processes going, but ultimately I want them to be self-sustaining. So at some stage after you've put all that effort in, they tick over of their own accord, because that is how the natural world works. It's dynamic and ever-changing and self-sustaining. And I won't truly understand that whole picture for several years, but it's immediately obvious that we've got the whole upper catchment of the River Nairn, which is a salmon river, and all salmon rivers, most salmon rivers are ailing, and the Atlantic salmon is in catastrophic decline. And you can see that whole upper catchment bereft of a single tree, give or take, with this peatland, which has taken probably 6,000-7,000 years to form in that place on the Monolea, with channels and gullies, and the water spilling out of that landscape in double quick time. And so the River Nairn has this tremendous peak flow rate. It rained there the other day, and 2 hours later there was a torrent of spate water carving new channels and carrying and moving materials and deposits and washing away spawning beds and dumping material further downstream. And then later in the summer, you'll find that landscape further down is dry, is bone dry. They're experiencing drought conditions. And that's because the peatland used to hold that water. It used to be peatland with pockets of vegetation and trees. It hadn't been drained and ditched, and so it didn't release all of its water in one great big go. It moderately released it over the course of 6 months, let's say. And so not only did you not get those spate conditions, so salmon are able to spawn, riverine birds were able to nest, but you also didn't get the drought conditions in summer because it delivered a moderated amount of water across the year. And so there's some really, I was about to say low-hanging fruit because it's easy to understand that there's some action that needs to happen. As we've done already hundreds of hectares of peatland restoration. It's not really low-hanging fruit because it's still quite difficult and quite expensive, but it's happening. And then there are some things that are going to take a bit more time. So we've got more than 1,000 acres of commercial forestry, and I'm having to form an opinion on that. So to see huge, great big blocks of Sitka spruce, I find really arresting. If you go inside them, it's like going into a dark room. No light reaches the ground. There is no ground cover, no understory. You get a little bit of life around the edge, so you can hear some bird song, you can hear some gold crests and things around the edge. Go 2 trees into it, and it's like being in a dark room. You don't hear or see anything. And so my heart is telling me that we need to do something different with that, and I'm sure we will. Over what time frame? I'm still kind of working that one out, because if I just take that landscape away, then I've lost that edge habitat, which is where the owls perch or where whatever the birds might be are utilising. And it is some structural diversity which is otherwise missing elsewhere in the estate. So I do need to give some thought to that. Then I'm bound to restock it because of the various rules which apply where forestry is concerned. And then if I'm going to restock it, which we will, we need to understand how we're going to do that. And if we're going to do it through natural regeneration, which is my absolute focus, it's not always possible, but it's my absolute priority to attend to that first. Then if that natural regeneration is going to work, then we've got to look at all of the other component interlinking factors like deer number, like exposure. The trees really struggle to get away in isolation in these hundreds of miles of empty hills because there's no trees, and so it's really exposed. Once you get a few trees and a few copses, withies, that sort of thing, then it's much easier for those trees to spread from that point. But the first tree has a hard time. And so it's quite a complex bit of understanding.
So there's a domino in terms of which moves first.
Yeah.
Where are you have you changed anything on the deer management side of things yet?
Yeah, but profoundly. So I never seen so many deer in a landscape as I've seen there. In fact, the estate before we came along was promoting a rising deer number because stalking was a big part of their remit. It's not a big part of our remit, and so we are managing those deer numbers down.
Do you know what level you were at per square kilometre?
No, and I spent some time exploring, trying to find my head per square kilometre. And then I came to the conclusion that that's not what I need to measure. One, it's really difficult because they're transient mobile populations. But 2, we've got these great big blocks of badly fenced forestry, and so they sit in there all day. And so you can count the ones you can see, and who knows how many.
Plus, my is going to be greater than you can, probably.
Yeah, by a significant degree. And really and truly, why count the deer? I don't have any problem with deer. I have a problem with lack of natural regeneration. So we count the regeneration. And that's what matters, not the number of deer. I don't want to eradicate deer. I want to promote natural regeneration. So at the point at which we've got lots of natural regeneration and we understand we've got an appropriate deer number, so that's what we monitor rather than deer numbers, which has been a bit of a journey in itself.
Interesting. So at one of our estates, we the group of gamekeepers get together once a year and say, let's just tell everyone it's 9. And because of that concept, we did get a group of infrared drones in working together to get the best possible count we could. Again, with the exact caveats we talked about, we were at least at 23 a square kilometre. So then we had a strong year this year working with an amazing local team and got us down to 10. We then had one angry neighbour that said, you've taken too many deer. We were like, well, you told us there's now 10. How many can we have taken? They went, oh, okay, good point.
Yeah. Whereas for me, not only was it difficult, but I really did question why I need to know deer per kilometre. What I really need to know is
how's the regen doing?
Yeah, how's the regen doing? And that number will be different on every estate because of all the variables that exist on a different place. And so the regen is what matters to me.
Where are you on the philosophy of some of the conservationists that say just go in there and obliterate everything year one?
I'll revert you to my previous answer. So I nearly said that's a ridiculous approach. I don't mean it's ridiculous. I just mean it's a presumptuous approach. Until you realise, until you monitor the effects, not the deer number, the actual output, then how do you know how many you need to get rid of? I mean, putting an arbitrary number on it at the beginning doesn't feel constructive to me.
I don't even think it's feasible anyway. As you say, so transient, and in the landscapes up there, they can move en masse at speed. Yeah, it wasn't something we were comfortable with either. We recognised we needed to do more as we learned about the environment, so we have pushed that number much higher. We're not at the 600, we were at 300 for the sort of 12,000 acres we have there. Yeah, but we're starting to see that change, and we know it's going to have to be more in the years to come.
Yeah.
So we start tree planting hopefully the back end of next year.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of fencing and planting and space for natural regen.
It's so difficult because the last thing I want to do is put up another fence. I mean, you walk through these beautiful landscapes, altered as they are, still beautiful. And every 5 minutes you come up, it's been carved up by another type of
We're
fence.
hopeful we can be net neutral on fencing. So because there's so much redundant fencing across the estates, we're trying to see if we can do it, that we're only going to remove historic, battered, left in the environment fencing and make sure we put no more fencing than there was already there. And we have budgeted for the removal of fencing once trees are sustainable. The landscapes are so open in Scotland, I just don't think it's plausible without.
Yeah.
And yet, again, it's one of those contradictions. I don't like the amount of fencing we've had to do and put in place, but boy, does it make a difference. And it's just not feasible without.
So I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool Scottish land manager, and I don't come with all of that hard-earned knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. And I'm sure the guys around me find that a bit frustrating at times. But what it allows me to do is to have stupid ideas, and sometimes the stupid ideas work. And you need someone who's not part of the system almost to say, well, what if we did this? And so I really like spending my time. It must be very frustrating, but the guys I work with, I'm constantly asking them why. So, what did you do today? Why did you do that? Were you putting that fence up? Are you running a trap line? And my question is always, why? And sometimes it's quite difficult to answer. And sometimes the answer is because we always have done it.
So often we do that.
And I want to know why, and I want to have a whole round table of stupid ideas of different ways we can do it. And so I'm looking, when you take down a Sitka spruce plantation, for example, you've got all this brash, which has got very limited commercial value. You can sell it for £1 a tonne or something to a wood chip business. Or you can leave it, but it sits in that landscape for a decade looking like kind of bleached ivory and feeling a bit arresting. And I'm quite interested in what happened if you manoeuvred that around, if you made it very difficult for a herbivore to walk amongst it and you planted amongst the brash. How big would that have to be to negate the need for a fence because it became an inconvenience to nip the sapling?
About the stumps as well.
I hate the stumps, yeah.
In forests, they'll say, oh, no, they'll rot down. And then you go see, they don't.
They don't. Well, they do. It takes 20 years.
Yeah. And it just, we often talk about it, Josh and I, when we're up in Scotland, that you see those clear fell plantations and there's nothing sustainable about those. They're just an abomination where the landscape has just been absolutely pillaged. And so Dan and I, our head of environment, when we've done river restoration work before, we've often used tree stumps to pin meanders and help with river restoration work. So we plan on trying to use as many of those possible in peatland restoration, because you're effectively replicating those natural, as you said, when you look down at those peat profiles. We saw some amazing land in Wester Ross. There's some exposed sort of 8 to 9 metre clear sections, and some woody debris everywhere, like a river after a flood, and preserved perfectly. So we think we can use a large number, because we've got 1 or 2 areas of forestry will have to come down in future years, only small, not the scale you've got. But if we can use those stumps, if we can make it viable to move them on site for the peatland restoration, that'd be a wonderful circular principle.
And to keep going with that, next round of stupid ideas. So we're looking at moving our brash and stumps in a viable way. Haven't quite hit on that yet. To take into the upland watercourses. So there's upland watercourses, those burns and channels are chucking that water off the hill double quick. There's not enough trees to have beavers, and there's
going to make leaky dams with them.
So just stick them all in, make thousands upon thousands of leaky dams, relocate them, slow that flow of water off the landscape. You've taken the unsightly brash from the lowland areas and you've put them to good use in the upland area. So we're working through that same that same bit of thinking at the same time.
Amazing, Gil. We need to do a session on terrible ideas on the next one. That's all the time we've got for today. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been an absolute pleasure, and always is, to sit down and compare ideas and experiences with you. And I think we came to visit you before we'd even bought our first estate, or really early on, and some of the ways you've approached the community, the education side of it, the experience, the special nature of it has really informed our thinking. So thank you for all your help along the way, and thank you for coming in today.
But thank you for the invite. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, guys. Bye.